Welcome back to She Rises Daily, Emerging You in 10. I'm your host, DocShellie, here to bring you your daily dose of inspiration, empowerment, and growth. Have you ever looked at some part of your life and thought, I should be further along by now? Maybe it's your career, your business, your finances, a relationship, your healing, your fitness, a project, something you're learning. And the thought feels completely legitimate. Of course I should be further along, except according to what? Where is the schedule? Who established the deadline? What exactly were the milestones? And when did you agree to them? Because sometimes we're beating ourselves up for being behind on a timeline nobody actually created. So today, I want to challenge one little sentence. I should be further along by now. Not by immediately replacing it with some inspirational affirmation. I want us to interrogate the premise. Who said? By now usually contains a hidden expectation. Whenever you hear yourself say, I should have done this by now, there's a timeline hiding underneath it. Maybe you thought you'd be promoted by a certain age, married by 30, running a successful business within 3 years, over the heartbreak in 6 months, comfortable in the new role after 90 days, good at the new skill after 10 lessons. But where did that timeline come from? Sometimes there's a legitimate external deadline. Most of the time, though, we've cobbled it together from other people's experiences, cultural expectations, social media, old assumptions, and a healthy sprinkling of completely made-up shit. Then we turn it into a standard, and then we judge ourselves against it. Before deciding you're behind, identify the timeline you're actually using. You cannot evaluate whether you are late until you know who created the schedule. We build timelines before we understand the terrain. Think about how strange this actually is. We decide how long something should take before we've done it. I'm going to build that business in 2 years. I'll feel comfortable in this role in 6 months. I'm going to get over this quickly. I'm going to have this figured out by the end of the year. Based on what? We haven't encountered the obstacles yet. We don't know what else life will require. We don't know what we're going to learn along the way. We don't know how we'll change while pursuing it. We're estimating the length of a journey before we've seen the terrain. And then when reality doesn't match our estimate, we don't question the estimate, we question ourselves. That's backwards. Sometimes the problem isn't our progress. The original timeline was simply built with insufficient information. I've coached people who are objectively doing extraordinarily well, and they are miserable about it. They'll tell me everything they've accomplished, and then add, I thought I'd be further along by now. So I'll ask, where did you think you'd be? And they'll tell me. And then I'll ask, and when did you decide that? And that's where the conversation gets really interesting. Because sometimes the timeline was created 5 years earlier by a person who had absolutely no clue what the next 5 years were going to contain. There were different responsibilities, unexpected opportunities, loss, growth, changed priorities, new information, life, and yet they're holding today's self accountable to an estimate made by someone who hadn't lived any of that yet. Your earlier self was allowed to have a plan. They were not qualified to predict the future. So maybe we can stop treating their estimate like a contractual obligation. Progress does not become meaningless because it took longer. We have a strange tendency to discount our accomplishments when they arrive a little bit later than expected. You finally did the thing, and instead of celebrating, you think, yeah, but it took me forever. Excuse me? You still did the thing. The degree doesn't become less valuable because you earned it later. The business doesn't become less real because it took a little longer to build. The relationship isn't less meaningful because you found it later. The skill isn't less yours because it took more practice. And growth does not become less significant because you needed more time. Time taken and value created are not the same measurement. Stop letting an imaginary deadline steal the significance of actual progress. Sometimes behind is actually different. There's another possibility. Maybe you didn't simply move more slowly than expected. Perhaps the destination changed. You learned something. Your priorities shifted. A different opportunity appeared. Something stopped mattering. Something else stopped mattering more. And now you're measuring yourself against progress toward a destination you're not even sure you still want. That's not behind. That's different. So before pushing yourself harder to catch up, ask, do I still want where this timeline was taking me? Because there is absolutely no prize for arriving on schedule at a destination you outgrew along the way. Here's your reflection question. Where are you currently telling yourself, I should be further along by now? And whose timeline are you actually using to make that judgment? And your power thought. Before you decide you're behind, make sure the timeline you're chasing still deserves authority over your life. Plans are absolutely useful. Goals matter. Deadlines can create focus. This isn't an argument for drifting through life and hoping everything eventually works itself out. It is an invitation to distinguish between a meaningful commitment and an imaginary timeline. Your life contains variables the person who created the original plan could not predict. So update the plan, reconsider the destination, acknowledge the terrain, and for goodness sake, give yourself credit for the ground you have already covered. Maybe you're not behind. Maybe you're simply living a life that refused to follow the spreadsheet. The next time you catch yourself thinking, I should be further along by now, don't immediately argue with yourself. Ask yourself 3 questions. Further along toward what? By whose timeline? And do I still want that destination? Your answers may tell you much more than the word should ever could. Thank you for joining me for another episode of She Rises Daily, Emerging You in 10. If you know someone who's currently giving themselves a terrible performance review against a timeline they apparently pulled out of thin air 5 years ago, please share this episode with them. And until next time, remember, your plans can guide you without becoming your judge. Update the timeline when the information changes. Honor the ground you've covered, and don't confuse taking longer with falling behind.